A disgusting guy who swears, Sky News analyst on the head of Russia's delegation in Geneva, and whether China is really prepared to claim Russian territories up to Baikal. We will talk about this with political analyst, European Leadership Network UK member Alexandra Filippenko. Alexandra, glad to see you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Alexandra, the Russian delegation at the Geneva talks was led by presidential aide Vladimir Medinsky, who previously used statements about history as a pretext for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. According to Sky News analyst Michael Clark, Russia's decision to return Medinsky to the delegation signals that Putin does not want to achieve anything in today's peace negotiations. Clark described Medinsky as a disgusting guy with a crazy view of Russian history who enjoys lecturing everyone on the subject. What objectives does Russia pursue by sending Vladimir Medinsky to lead its delegation? How do Medinsky's historical arguments influence Russia's negotiating position?
Well, I totally agree with you. Laughing or smirking at arguments, that is quote-unquote arguments, that is something absolutely far from reality, because we know that Vladimir Medinsky is the representative of that branch of Russian government, unfortunately, I must say government and the Kremlin, that are trying to rewrite history, totally rewrite history. Of course, we understand that, as we all know, the history is written by the winners, and right now we see that the Kremlin and the part of part of those surrounding Putin are trying to rewrite history while they are not winners. They are winners as they seize themselves on the Russian territory as of now, and they are rushing to rewrite it as fast as possible while they are in power. Because as Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, said that this is previously he talked about Medinsky, and when Medinsky already headed the negotiating team on the Russian side, that Mark Rutte said that Medinsky is some kind of a historian that constantly starts talking about the 12th century, and you cannot understand anything. And this is what Kremlin wants, for nobody to understand anything, to drag their feet. This is exactly the goal of Putin. This is exactly the goal of the Kremlin, because what we understand for President Trump, it is important, as we discussed previously, and for everyone, it's understandable that it would be important for President Trump to actually achieve something in Ukraine, to actually achieve something better prior to summer, better in the summertime, because this way he could talk about Republicans stopping the war in Europe, putting an end to the war in Europe, while the Democrats started that war not started the war, but they were witness to war starting in 2014 and then the full-scale invasion of 22, and these were always the Democrats that are to blame, while the Republicans can only stop wars. They stop wars that they were not witness to the start of. So for President Trump, it would have been wonderful, because his rating and the Republicans' ratings are not that good prior to the election. And of course, we're talking about the midterm elections in November. So what we've seen previously, when the ceasefire was achieved in the Middle East, President Trump's rating went up, Republicans' ratings went up, everything became a little better. And especially now, when Politico published the ratings of President Zelensky that are so high, the highest among all world leaders. President Zelensky is well known among the Americans, way more than, for example, Merz or Macron or any other European leader. President Zelensky is very well known, and he has a great positive rating, close to 70% of positive rating. At the same time, Putin is also well known, but he has negative 70 rating, more than 17 negative percent. So we understand that for Trump and for the Republicans in general, that would be a good win because Ukraine's war is seen by the Americans in a very straightforward way, unlike Israel, because with Israel, of course, there are many issues, especially that Democrats have and that many Americans have. They have questions and problems with the way the war was waged. But this is the whole other issue. For Ukraine, Americans don't have any questions. They understand. They see the aggressor, Russia, and the country that was attacked, Ukraine. So on the backdrop of those ratings of President Zelensky, of Ukraine, of course, Republicans' ratings would have gone up if there was at least ceasefire. Maybe not a peace deal, but ceasefire. That would already been wonderful for the Republicans. But Putin also understands that. He also knows that. And if President Trump can achieve something, he would talk about it, he would push, he might really push Russia, he might really do something about Russia. But there's a big issue with one thing. If there is absolutely no chance, and with Medinsky, we understand this is a signal of not having any chance. So if there's no chance to actually achieve something, would President Trump talk about it? No, he would not talk about it. He will try not to forget about Ukraine, but better not talk about it prior to the election. Maybe talk about after the election, but better put it away to the furthest corner of American discussions prior to the election, because this would mean that President Zelensky, Ukraine, that have very good ratings among the American voters, they would not be forgotten, of course, but President Trump would rather not talk about it. So Putin, that always pretends that he's ready to negotiate, he's showing that it's going nowhere. It's actually going nowhere. They will continue pretending that there is a negotiation, but it's a signal that no, you won't achieve anything. We already saw how Medinsky negotiates. Medinsky negotiated, please correct me if I'm wrong, in 22 also, in this first days of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. He is the one being put forward by the Kremlin when they need to drag their feet. And this is exactly what they're doing. So they are basically telling Trump, you will not achieve anything. So please just don't talk about it. Let's get back to this issue maybe later, but let's not talk about it. At the same time, they are sending Kirill Dmitriev to talk about business and to interest Trump in business. This is the second thing. But of course, when we see Medinsky, we must understand that it's a no-go. Nothing will change, especially because he's not a military man. He is merely not a psychological, let's say, base for this Russian invasion, but he is a philosophical, in a way, base for this Russian invasion. So he doesn't actually decide anything. It's not a military person. It's not a person that is by Putin when he makes decisions. So it's just a way for Kremlin to drag their feet and send a signal that nothing will be achieved.
Alexandra, yes, President Donald Trump has said ahead of trilateral talks in Geneva that Ukraine better come to the table fast. Given that Ukraine is already participating in the Geneva talks, what does President Trump mean by saying Ukraine should come to the table fast?
Well, this is all, of course, also as President Trump is talking, as mostly always, he's talking to the American audience. Because again, coming back to those ratings, there was a joke, especially in 24, prior to the American presidential election, that there is one person who should be actually going to the American election, and that's Mr. Zelensky, because he's so popular among the Americans that he's the one that should be. But it's of course, it's a joke because he wasn't born in the US, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, it's a joke. It's only a joke. But with that joke in mind, of course, in 23-24, we were talking about President Zelensky's ratings up more than 80% among the Americans. Now we're talking about 60. But still, with President Trump having his ratings around 36, 40%, and the Gallup poll, by the way, the most popular and the most important American sociological center decided to stop, or to at least postpone for some years, as they say. They will not measure the ratings of a president, of any president in power every month, as they did for more than 80 years. So right now, with, of course, many other outlets and many other sociological centers, they measure the ratings of the president. But we know from the Gallup poll that President Trump's ratings are around 36, 40%. They're very low. And with the Democrats, the same thing goes for the Democrats. And with President Zelensky's ratings being so high among the Americans, for Trump, it's important to say that it's the Ukrainians that are to blame that there is not a ceasefire. It's the Ukrainians. As he already said, that President Zelensky is the one who is standing behind not having an agreement. He is not, there is no agreement, there is no ceasefire because of Zelensky. That's ridiculous, because we all know that President Zelensky is the one who always said, of course, even without any pretext, let's have ceasefire right now, this second. He is ready. If it can be signed, it can be signed immediately. But for President Trump, this is a signal only for the Americans, because those Americans who, on the one hand, they know what is happening in Ukraine. They know who is President Zelensky. They know that Russia attacked Ukraine, and it's not the first time that Russia attacked Ukraine or other neighbors. And of course, I'm talking about Georgia in August 2008. So for those Americans, maybe they don't follow Geneva so much. They don't follow the negotiation, and they hear, oh, Ukrainians must come to the table. So that means Ukrainians are not at the table, probably, and they might, just might, not look at the news and just hear the president say that and have a worse, let's say, idea or a worse understanding of what is actually happening, and a worse view of the Ukrainian delegation. So it's only and solely for the American public, for the American people, for them, because they really like, let's say, let's put it this way, they really like President Zelensky, and they want President Zelensky to be successful, and they don't want President Trump to cater to Putin, and they don't like how President Trump communicates with Putin. So this is only for them, in the hope that they won't actually look at the news and won't actually learn what is really happening.
One of the leaders of the Russian opposition, Garry Kasparov, discussed that any attempt to reach an agreement to end the war in Ukraine without addressing its root cause is doomed to fail. He said Ukraine may agree to some compromise, but it is absolutely clear that the war cannot end while Putin remains in power. Everything else is just froth. Putin is the war. Putin's Russia is a military camp. This does not mean that Russia would necessarily end the war without Putin, but under Putin, it certainly will not. Can Russia's internal elites influence a reduction of military activity under Putin? And what do you think about this?
Well, I would only agree with Mr. Kasparov, of course. And I must say that previously, we haven't heard European elites, and especially the NATO elites and the people in the NATO, especially in the NATO headquarters, being so open and so precise about their view of Putin and his ideas regarding the war. Last week in Brussels, I was at the NATO headquarters during the meeting of ministers of defense, and I managed to talk to a lot of people in NATO headquarters, and everyone, absolutely everyone, from NATO officials to just people to different sources that I managed to talk to, Nobody told me that they think that Putin is serious about the negotiation. And I'm talking about NATO headquarters. No one there believes that Russia is serious regarding the negotiation, current Russia. I mean, I must say that they all talk about Putin, they all talk about the Kremlin, they all talk about the current government. They are not serious about it. And I've heard it, I didn't hear any other opinion. Everyone, absolutely everyone with whom I managed to talk to for 3 days, they repeated the same sentiment. And we've seen that also in Mark Rutte's words during his press conference. And we've heard the same thing in Munich, in the Munich Security Conference from State Secretary Marco Rubio. He said that he's not sure Russia is serious about the negotiation. What does it mean? It means Putin, of course, because there's only one person who actually makes the decision. We all understand that, and we need to keep that in mind. Although criminologists and those people that have sources inside the Kremlin, they have this idea that there are also people that would support some kind of a ceasefire, a peace deal, or even going back to the internationally recognized borders, but only when Putin is not in power, only when Putin is not there. For him, it's larger than life. This is more important than anything else. And Donbass, and I also quote some NATO officials that I talked to in NATO headquarters, Donbass is not the end game. Donbass is not the last goal. As President Trump said many times, Ukraine has been the apple of Putin's eye. He's been talking about Ukraine for so long, and all those ideas, all those arguments, quote-unquote arguments by Medinsky and the like, they are all the ridiculous rewriting of history, rewriting of the actual facts and how things actually unfolded. So, of course, for Putin, it's the most important thing because he wants to restore not only the Soviet Union, he wants to restore something like Russian Empire. But the Soviet Union, of course, that would be the restoration that's most important for him. And if he cannot get the Baltic states, for example, definitely he cannot because they are a part of NATO. No, but there is danger for Moldova, there is danger for Kazakhstan, there is danger for many other countries that are surrounded by Russia, of course. And Ukraine right now, and that is also common knowledge and everyone understands that, unfortunately, tragically fighting for all of them. Fighting for all of those countries that Putin would have already attacked if it wasn't for Ukraine, if it wasn't for the Ukrainian resilience. So, of course, for Putin, it's extremely important to continue to go on. And definitely, there must be, I shouldn't say definitely, but there must be those people, maybe not in the closest circle for Putin, because he is, we understand that the KGB agent is always a KGB agent. And I must say, he said that exactly to the BBC correspondent in Moscow, that a KGB agent is always a KGB agent. So for him, of course, he doesn't trust anyone apart from a few closest, a few select people. And we don't even know how if he trusts his own family. There is this idea among some Kremlinologists that actually his daughter, one of his daughters, who is good friends with Kirill Dmitriev, is one of those who thinks that there should be a ceasefire, but not to stop the war forever, but just to have a breather, just to have a pause, to regroup and go on again. So for Putin and for people close to him, of course, this war is very important in their ideological worldview. And Vladimir Medinsky, the head of the Russian delegation, is one of those who presents the philosophical background for all that worldview of restoring the Soviet Union or Russian Empire.
On the threat from China, Kasparov warned that the Russian empire will inevitably collapse, but this could create a new problem. Beijing is prepared to take Russian territories all the way to Lake Baikal. How realistic is the scenario of a rapid Russian collapse with subsequent Chinese expansion? Which territorial claims could Beijing pursue following the collapse of the Russian empire?
Well, of course, we understand that Beijing right now is very careful in the way it interacts with Russia. On the one hand, Beijing receives all the benefits of the war. And it's very sad to say that there are huge benefits of the war for China, because for example, right now we know that Russia has too much oil. There's no capacity to keep all those barrels of oil in Russia. There's too much oil. They need to get rid of it. And that is why they're selling the oil for the price of $20 per barrel and $25 per barrel. And of course, for China, this is a great opportunity to get the cheapest resources, and also not only get the resources, but also sell everything to Russia. Because there is no way, there are no markets. The European market is closed. The Latin American market is closed. There is no way to buy from other countries. So of course, Russia is buying from China. So China is producing everything for Russia, and China is getting cheap resources. And for example, if we talk about drones, we understand that this war is a drone war, and it's also been discussed by many military specialists. And right now, it's a race of time of how fast will Russia or the American side or NATO countries will have the opportunity, the AI opportunities to have just one computer or one person through AI controlling, for example, 100 drones. Because right now you need a person to control a drone. This is a drone war. So it's only a question of time. When will Russia have that opportunity? When will Russia have that technology? And where could it get that technology from? Most probably from China. Most probably Chinese companies will be the ones that have that technology, that have that AI opportunity. So for China, of course, it's also very interesting. How would they won't need that much cheap resources, but if they could exchange it for land. Why not? Why not give that technology to Russia in exchange for lands up until Lake Baikal? And even now, we understand that there is huge presence of Chinese companies, of Chinese investment surrounding Baikal, surrounding Irkutsk, surrounding Angarsk, for example. That's a former closed city where there is a huge nuclear power station. So there are vast interests of China in that region. So, of course, if China has a new technology that might be a game changer in the war, Russia will probably not have enough money to buy that technology, because that would be a breakthrough, and that would really, it would be like a nuclear, let's say, bomb in the Second World War. This might be a game changer. So how will Russia pay? They will most probably pay in the land. And for China, that would be very interesting. And this could be a project of, I don't know, renting it for 100 years, for example, or at least for 49 years or something like that, for 99 years, for 49 years, something like that. So, of course, China is very careful right now. It is getting all the benefits right now, and it might get even more benefit if the war goes on, and if there is this AI technology that might really become the game changer in this drone war, because we understand this is a new kind of war, and everyone knows that. And of course, it's also been discussed at the NATO headquarters ministerial meeting of ministers of defense in NATO. And we all understand that this is a race of time. And for China, year 27 is especially important, because in year 27, it's going to be 100 years of the Chinese army and the next meeting of the Chinese Communist Party. It's all going to happen in 2027. This is why American specialists and my colleagues that actually are China watchers, because China is so closed down that everyone who is a political analyst on China, they merely call themselves China watchers. This is the only thing you can do, just to watch what is actually happening. So all the China watchers are very concerned about 2027 and what is that going to bring, not only to Taiwan, but actually to the world.
Alexandra, parallel to our conversation right now, there are reports of potential missile threats from Russia's Astrakhan region. We're talking about Oreshnik missile, but this our message to Putin that Ukrainians are not afraid. Missile threats will not break our will, intimidate our people, or force us into submission. We remained united, resilient, and determined. Ukraine stands firm, and no act of intimidation will change that. Alexandra, thank you so much for this conversation, for your thoughts. I need to say that today we had a conversation with Alexandra Filippenko, political analyst, European Leadership Network UK member. Thank you so much, and see you.
Thank you for having me. See you.